You all heard this morning some good presentations about why it's important to do this. And essentially the issue is, how do you get this done? And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we did it, and obviously there are variations in how you can do it within your own local unit. How many of you are looking at developing something in the next year or so? Okay. Obviously you have to take a look at your own organization and how you go about doing that and who you get involved in doing it. But essentially there are a whole lot of ways of doing it. And I'm just going to go through a little bit of a scenario of how we did it in Ottawa County. First of all, I'm the county clerk. I'm a constitutional officer. I'm elected. My responsibilities are circuit court records, vital records, elections, boards and commissions, and registers of deeds. Our county is about 272,000 as of last week. We're the 8th largest county in the state of Michigan. What we looked at a number of years ago, and I've been involved with the on-base ImageSoft product since 2005. So we probably used it in all of these areas a lot more than anybody else in the state of Michigan. And I can tell you that from the beginning, we could not be performing the services for the people in our county the way that we do had we not developed this process. And again, we started looking at the evolution of documents, all right? And it goes through a very, basic process. You go through wall paintings and clay tablets and papyrus, and then we get to what we all know and love are the file cabinets and files that you keep on the shelves. So the next generation of how you keep files is obviously what we're going to be talking about now. There are a whole lot of problems that you well know that exist with paper files. They're voluminous. They're costly. And essentially, when you get to a point, you're either going to develop or have to build new buildings to house that information, or you're going to have to do off-site storage. And off-site storage is not a cheap process to go through either. You have the risk of missing or lost documents in the process. There's reduced efficiency, increased employee stress, and in my office that was of significant problem when we started looking at different issues. And of course you have the single user access. When somebody has a paper file, it's the only paper file that you have, in particular in the court or any other area. Somebody's got that out as a paper file. No one else can see that. So you may have more people that want to see that file, but they have to wait for somebody else to come and bring it back. No disaster recovery. And if you have disaster recovery, it's a very expensive process. You're either going to go with an argon gas process, you're going to go with freeze drying if you have floods. If the papers are destroyed by fire, there's actually no way of really getting those files back. Have you ever spent time looking for a file? Nobody's ever done that. Yeah, I'm sure you have. Tried finding a document that was missing from a file, which happened to be pointed out by a judge or somebody else who's looking for the file? Had a friend of the court tell us, and for those of you who are in the court process, friend of the court comes back and says, well, we don't have a copy of that. Yeah, we gave you a copy. You go through that process quite a bit. You felt like your office is a silo, completely independent from every other department, and all they want to do is essentially blame you for files that are missing or files that can't be found, don't understand what you do, and you don't understand what the other departments do either. The biggest problem that we have is the time zone difference. In New York, it's 2:45. In government offices, it's 1954. Okay? So we've got to look at how we change. And one of the things that we did when we started looking at it in my county, is we looked at what is happening in private industry. Private industry was way ahead of us in this process. We started looking at how they were doing things online. We started looking at how they kept their files, and they were way ahead of us in the process. But again, they were not impacted by a lot of the things that we're impacted by, or were impacted by, and that's state law, or court rule, or a combination of those things. So how did the journey begin? It's a complex process, and it's not resolved overnight. Don't think of, you coming here to the conference and seeing all the things that can occur here and, oh, it's a great process. We're going to be able to see all of this stuff. It's going to be online. We've got multiple users, all of that stuff, and tomorrow it's all going to be different. Doesn't happen that way. What we did was we formed a committee, a justice-wide, multiple department committee, and started that process. Now, I'll tell you frankly, when I started looking at developing this process in our county, it was in the 1990s, late 1990s. It took me about 6 or 7 years to get the IT department and our county administrator to look at the necessity for developing this program. So it's not an easy process to go through. And once we got the approval to start looking at a process, and our IT department came along, it still took us another 1.5 years to get to where we should be, where we were going with the RFP. The process is not quick. It takes a while. And it takes a while to make sure that everybody knows what you're talking about doing. You can't just sit down and say, all right, we're going to image all of our documents and we're going to have this workflow that goes back and forth and do this kind of stuff. You've got to educate the people who are going to be using it. And essentially, when we put together the committee, we had probably 15 or 20 people on the committee to initially start the discussion. And after we sat down and we said, well, we're going to do this digitalization project, we're going to image our documents, and we can share these. The next committee meeting that we had went from 15 or 20 down to about 10. Half of them said, well, we don't even know what that is, we don't think it's going to be valuable, and we're not going to look at it. Now, I'm talking about 2005 and 6, so it's been a while ago, and people are more aware of what happens now. But yet, even at that, when you start talking about the people who are involved in that situation within the context of what you do, they still don't understand, for the most part, what it can do for them. So the discussion has to take place about what can it do and how will it impact me. I can remember, frankly, when we sat down in the prosecuting attorney's office. The prosecuting attorney's office staff sat there and said, well, I understand you take a picture of a document and it goes in a file, and so what difference does that make? How is it going to impact me? What can I do with it? So what we did was we had to show them what it was and what it does. And there are all kinds of places around the state of Michigan, obviously there's going to be places close to you as well, that you can visit. There are sites out there. And you can call those places that already use part of this or the system itself. And frankly, we'd love to have you come to Ottawa and take a look at what we do with it, so we can show you how it's used. And even if you're associated with the courts or you're not associated with the courts, we use it in a number of different places I'll talk about a little bit later. We met regularly after the site visits to determine the needs and the interconnections. We no longer talked about operating in silos. We understood that the Sheriff's Department is associated with the Prosecuting Attorney's Office, is associated with the County Clerk's Office, is associated with the District Court Office, and all of those work together, and the documents, the information is shared between all of those offices. And they figured that out and said, well, gee, why do we have to Why do we have to enter documents or information in the Sheriff's Department and then again enter it in the Prosecuting Attorney's Office and enter it again in the other offices? The current departments that are involved, County Clerk, 20th Circuit Court, our Trial and Family Divisions, Probate Court, Friend of the Court, the 58th District Court and Probation, Prosecuting Attorney, Sheriff's Department, Community Mental Health. We have vital records offices that I have that are all involved in this process. We have several local police agencies now that are involved in this. The city of Grand Haven, for example, our Grand Valley Community Security Office is also involved in this, sharing information electronically back and forth. And we also have some local units. We have one of our townships that also is involved in this process. And we bring them into that process as we developed it. Now, after you've gotten to the point of having all of these people together, talking about what you can do, obviously understanding that they're not individuals, they work collectively with other departments and other offices, we did a couple of other things. You know, it's not good enough, essentially, when you're looking at also getting some funding, to sit down and say, gee, this is what we ought to do, and you ought to spend whatever it costs to get this done, because it will help. You know, I mean, I think you've gone to your finance areas and tried to develop that process. They need some other information in order to put it together, what it's going to cost and how is it going to save me some money. We did a time study. We did an evaluation of the electronic management to utilize comprehensive time study materials and analyze to verify actual efficiency. We did 480 hours of time study that was collected in the office. And that was not just of the county clerk's office, but the sheriff's department, the prosecuting attorney's office, the friend of the court, all of the offices that were involved or interested in putting it together were involved in the time studies. We had 480 hours of that. There were 45 unique workflow processes that were analyzed. And I'm not talking about the electronic workflows, we're talking about the paper workflows that essentially when the paper comes in, where does it go and who takes care of it and what do they do with it? We had over 400 pages of time study and material usage computations. And they actually did, as you see here, they did come in and follow the people around. How long does it take you to pick up a document or to transmit a document, copy a document, all of those kinds of things? The initial Justice Department implications the first year after the time study. And this is where it really became important when we started showing the data to the funding agency, our county board. The projections were based on internal study that we had done and the administration performed. We had 12,400 regular staff hours that could be saved. We had 450 some overtime hours that could be saved. We had 550,000 fewer pages of copied documents. Now, you're going to put some figures with that. It all translates into dollars. We had 3,000 file folders that we didn't need to purchase. Now, that one is a little misleading because there are some things we needed to change before we could get to that point. Internal department plans. How can you manage change? Now, you know, it's one thing, I think you all realize, it's one thing for the department heads or the elected officials to sit down and start talking about how you want to develop this and how it's supposed to work and what benefit it's going to be to you. But you've got to work it out in your own department how to manage that change if it were to occur. You got job descriptions. Are the job descriptions in your department going to have to change in that process. You've got union issues. If you change job descriptions, how does it affect the unionization issues? Okay? One of the things that I did when we started talking about this, and I knew that my people were going to be a little bit concerned about what they were going to do and how they were going to have to do it, is I bought all of them a copy of the book, Who Moved My Cheese? Okay? They all got a copy of it, and they were instructed to go read the book. And what we did is we took little pages out of the book and we posted them all over the office. So anytime that they walked around a corner, they came up to the counter or whatever, they could see a picture of Who Moved My Cheese. So they knew that there was something that was going to happen, and the attitude issue was, well, something is going to happen here. It's not going to be the same as it always was, so we better be ready for it. And again, you know that they're never ready for it. No matter how much you prepare them, they're never ready for what ultimately comes about. Staffing issues. What's wrong with the way we do it? And that's essentially what they come back with. All right? Well, what's wrong with the way we do it now? It works, doesn't it? Why do we have to change it? And then you go through that explanation of, I'm the boss, I'll tell you. No, you don't do that, okay? You do have to sit down and explain to them that, this is a process. Your ultimate goal is to service the people in the community. And to service them means you're going to have to change some things. And it's more effective and more efficient and faster. All of those kinds of things go into that description. And again, they ask the question, why do we do what we do the way we do it? So part of that is an analysis of having all of those people get into the room, all of your staff get into a room, and start talking about how that paper flows. We had several people in the court records division back in 2004 and 5. We sat there and watched how that paper came in. And essentially it was something came in and somebody grabbed it and they gave it to this person and that person did something and gave it to that person, and some other time same kind of paper would come in, they'd grab it and give it to another person and that person would give it to another person. Well, why do we do it that way? So you have to begin to analyze how that paper flows and where it goes and who gets access to it. Once we got to that point, we had to develop the RFP. The RFP is, most of you know, a very thoroughly developed document on what you want and how it's supposed to be developed. Our IT department put the RFP together, but they did it with each of the departments we had involved in it, which at this point was the county clerk's office, the circuit court, the friend of the court, the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's office. We all had these people or representatives of those offices in the area to help develop that RFP, because we realized that the RFP can be developed by the IT department. The IT department is going to look at the analytical part of it. What equipment do we need? All of the technical stuff, but not the practical stuff. The practical stuff comes from your office. How does it work? How does it flow? Where does it go? And we needed that in there also, because if you didn't do that, you're going to get to a point where the equipment that you have doesn't conform to what you're requiring it to do. And one of the big problems that we had initially with some of the departments was IT and the department didn't recognize that their PCs didn't have the capability of doing some of the things that we wanted done. Now the staff sat there and said, and the supervisors, this is what we need to do and this is how we want to do it, but when it came down to actually implementing it, it was the hardware that didn't necessarily work the way that it was supposed to. So, you know, if you're going in that direction, which I hope you are, then essentially make sure that your hardware complies with what you're requiring to be done with the software. After we had the RFP sent out, we had probably, I think, 15 or 20 responses to the RFP. We went through a two-tiered evaluation. The evaluation, again, was not just done by the IT department. They did part of it because they looked at the RFP responses and said, these are the ones that can technically comply with what we want done. We then looked at the department functions, and the departments looked at the responses and came back and said, you know, this one doesn't comply, this one does comply. So it was a two-tiered approach that we used. And then from that point, we did demos. We picked the top 3 that we thought would comply with what we wanted, and we had them come in and did the dog and pony show. And in the dog and pony shows that came in, the demos that they had, we invited some of our staff to come in and look at those also. Because as they showed how the paper flowed and how this worked and you could do this and that and the other thing, staff all of a sudden got an idea of how this was going to be developed and what it could do. So we're now building the support. You've got support of the departments, you've got the support of the IT department, you've got the support of your staff, who actually is going to be very important in getting this done. By the way, in case I forget to mention this, you know, one of the things that, and I hope it still doesn't happen, but one of the things that happened back when we started this process was, you know, administration came up and said, gee, you know, you're going to spend X number of dollars on development of the software program, you're going to need new hardware, this is going to be costly. How many staff are you going to lose? In other words, how many staff are going to be eliminated out of your office? Okay? It's a typical IT issue. Okay? And so we spent a good deal of time sitting down with them and saying, listen, don't go there. Number one, you've got all of these staff people that are sitting there putting this program in place. And why are they putting it in place according to them? So they can lose their jobs. All right? Now, how effective is it going to be to have them develop a program, put it into place, and then know that they're going to lose their job because of the process? All right? So we got rid of that one right away. We agreed that no one would lose their job. Administration wouldn't mention it again. And what would essentially happen is that if through the process we lost people by moving out of the department and taking other jobs or attrition, then that would be the issue. We wouldn't refill those positions if it wasn't necessary to fill them. Now, I mentioned our IT department wrote the proposal, but we don't need to invent the wheel. I mean, we've been out there for a long time doing these things. If you're talking about writing our RFPs, or who in your county or city or township is going to be writing an RFP, take a look at some of those that have already been done. We'll be glad to send you copies. All you have to do is request them. So you've got 4 copies here, or 4 counties that have written RFPs, and you can take parts of that or all of those and look at them and put them into your own RFP. So don't rewrite the whole process. We'd be glad to help you in that process of putting those together. So we had a return on investment. We had all of these things that we did with the study, how many hours we were going to save, how many pages we were going to save, you know, all of that. We had multiple department support. We had the issue of service to the people. And by the way, one of the other questions that I should mention that the administration asked was, what kind of a program are you get? Is it simply going to be unique to the courts? Or is it going to be something that can be used countywide for other kinds of issues? And they demanded that it be a universal program. So we didn't have to use it just in the courts, we could use it in all kinds of other departments. So that was one of the criteria that they put in that we had to develop in that program also. The staffing attrition. So we talked about attrition and no layoffs. That was important to the staff because it now had them have a part ownership in what they were doing. It was a new program, a new process, and they developed an ownership on that as well. And obviously, cost and the departmented savings that came through. The projected hard savings with statutory rule changes. And mind that it says statutory rule changes came over a 25-year life period, and I don't pay attention to the numbers because those have changed a bit. But the graph shows you that with the program, we were going to save a substantial amount of money over the years. And that came as a big surprise to administration when they started looking at what is it going to do for our programs? What are we going to save? What kind of cost is it going to be? These are the costs for a year that we have proven we've saved. Staffing reductions through attrition, $640,000. Postponements in hiring staff, $161,000. Total labor savings, almost $1 million just in total labor savings. And that's not laying people off, it's just not filling vacancies that occur because we don't need those people. We don't need that staff anymore. Some of these that we have in here, paper, toner, postage, envelopes, folders, and storage, it's bigger than that. We can't even begin to get a real good handle on what the total savings is. Because every time we start using it, somebody asks the question about why we can't do it this way, and we ultimately save more money doing it. I remember when we first started developing the program in our court records division, and they were getting all of this information, and the images were coming up, and they were putting them in the folders and whatever else that was going on. And essentially, we get the phone call from one of the attorneys, can I have a copy of this? Could you make me a copy of this document? It's okay, sure, we can do that. One of my staff members runs over to me and says, you know, we've got this here. Why don't we just email it to them? Oh my goodness, we never thought of that when we were looking at the whole program. So we started emailing documents. And there's your paper, there's your postage, your envelopes, your staff time. You don't have to make copies of that anymore. And essentially, when you're making copies of it, remember the fact that, you know, if you've got the folder and it's all in paper, you go get the folder, you go to the copy machine, you make the copies. All of that's time. When you're on the computer and the document is imaged and you pull up the file and you get to the document that you want, you press a button and it's sent electronically to someplace. Or you can make the copy right there at a printer that's on your employee's desk. So you don't have to get away from your desk. There's time that's not wasted in that process of moving back and forth. So anyway, our total savings, we know, is over $1 million. It's probably more than that. Now, legislatively, when we initiated these programs, there were a lot of things that we found were not necessarily legitimately things we could do. There were court rules There were legislative issues that came up. Our circuit court, for example, gave us an interpretation that we could do electronic signatures. There's a court rule, there's a statute that allows for electronic signatures. Our district court said, no, we're not going to accept electronic signatures, okay? And I'll tell you, if you're looking at developing this in the court, it's a great system in the court. You'd be surprised how effective and efficient it is. Not to suggest that it's not effective and efficient in the others as well, but the judges need to be, I shall say, coddled into getting this done, because they're used to having that file folder in front of them. And they don't necessarily want to do the electronics. As more and more judges come on that are younger and younger, they're more apt to be involved in this process. But, you know, that's a minor part of the whole program. One of the other things that we did was we looked at an electronic seal. Now, if you seal a document as a certified copy, you have a raised seal on that, right? It's not necessary to do. Almost every statute we looked at initially said that you needed a raised seal on a document if you're going to certify it. So we went back and changed the statute. Statute now says that you can do an electronic seal, but you have to be careful with an electronic seal, because anybody can put an electronic seal on a document. The electronic seal has to be burned into the document, not layered onto the document, so it can't be stripped and used for other methods. So that changed, that section of statute got changed. We're one of 2 counties in the state that does electronic certification of documents. Court documents, people want certified copies of it. We electronically certify them and send them through email. So they can call us, they can have a document within 5 minutes. We do electronic certification. Since we use this program with our vital records also, we use the electronic certification for vitals, all of our deaths, marriage. We don't use it for births because for some reason or other the federal government doesn't get this stuff, you know? They don't like electronics. The electronic filing, we have 2 processes in the state right now. One is voluntary. My court is a voluntary process, and that's up to the judges. Now, we don't make that decision. The judges make that decision. Grand Traverse County is a mandatory. Their judges decided that it was going to be mandatory. My preference would have been to have it mandatory, because we now have a statute that says anything that's transmitted into the court electronically does not have to be copied and put in a paper file. You can use that electronic copy in the file as a legal document. So you can print it off if you want, or you can email it, and it's a legal document. So we've changed that process. Then comes the electronic storage of court documents. And this is the biggest one, because I don't care if, you know, what system you're working in now, whether it's a circuit court or a friend of the court or vital records or water and sewer, whatever the case might be, and you've got documents that have a retention period on them, and the retention period is permanent, you're sitting there with tons and tons of paper that need to be stored. And that's an expensive process. And by the passage of Public Act 199 of last year, we now have a statute that says that anything that's transmitted electronically can stay electronically. You don't have to go through that process of printing it off and putting it in a file. And even the documents that do come in by paper, you can image and store in an electronic file. The Supreme Court, by year's end, is supposed to come through with a court rule that goes along with the law that says the process or stipulates the process that you can go through in putting that together. And just think about, I don't care what kind of documents you have, if you can put them in an electronic file and store them, the storage space that that takes up versus what your paper takes up, how much can that save you in the process? In a lot of different ways. Where does the money come from? And that's the big question. Almost all of your money is going to come from general fund. That's where it is. That's why you go through the ROI. That's why you do your time studies and all of that to develop the program, to go back to your administrator, your funding agency, and say, this is what we can save. And by looking at the cost of the program and what you can save, you know, and you're looking at over the years, what's the cost of hiring people to do this over the years? So you put that all together, and it comes out really well. Do your time studies, do your evaluations, do your estimates. There are also some grants that can be applied for and you can get, and we've always had some success with ImageSoft. They will provide you with the name of the grant and when the grant papers are due, so you can file for those. And friend of the court had Title IV funds. 66%, or I think it's 66% of whatever they have developed through this process can be paid through Title IV funds. So that was an advantage to them, and was one of the was actually the second department in our county to go through the process of putting things in document storage in the imaging process. Growing pains, yeah, there are a lot of growing pains. Staff attitudes and turnover. I started with the staff in my court records division of 15 people. Within the first 3 years that we started this, and I told you that we went through the who moved my cheese and getting them involved in it. Some of the people you'll find in your offices are to an age level where they just don't want to deal with this stuff. And you have that turnover. And we had some people who just didn't want to handle it. And out of the 15 people, I only have 4 left that were involved in the office before we went through this process. But it was a purging process as well. You had people who were not interested in electronics, digitalization, anything, and you had people who just didn't want to deal with it and ultimately weren't a good fit to what we had. They were also doing double duty. Remember, when you're changing a system, you're going to put in the new system, but you're going to compare it to the documents that are coming in with the old system, and you're going to do this comparison for a while so you know you're not missing anything and things are moving in the paths that you wanted. So there's going to be double duty. We had to have people coming in on the weekends sometime just to keep up with what we ultimately had to put together. All departments, courts, wanting changes, upgrades immediately. As soon as we started having the programs put in, as I mentioned earlier, we had people coming in and say, well, why can't we do this or why can't we do that? They began to think the process through. And a lot of the departments were putting extra special demands on our IT department to make sure that things got changed. You can't do them all at once. So when you sit down with a committee and you start to work on what's going to be done and who's going to go first and who's going to go second and all of that process, you've got to look at the changes that are going to happen or the demands on the system and whose priorities are going to go first, second, and third. And you have to agree on that. Otherwise, you're going to have conflict. And the silos that you had once before this system are going to redevelop. And you don't want to do that. So you continue to work together. We still meet as a group once a month and go through all of the changes, the demands that we want, and prioritize those as a group once a month. So we still work together that way. And it's important that you do, otherwise you're going to be way off base and people are not going to be happy with one another. These are the kinds of things that have changed with the package. And it's just really developed into a system where we have accomplished all that we wanted to accomplish. And we're still in the process of developing new programs and new processes. Part of what I hadn't had any new staff in my office since 1998. 1998, I had 15 people in my office. Today, I have 15 people. No changes. One of the other things that you can use as a enticement, if you will, is that we did have questions, because of, well, we're going to do this electronically. How many people are you going to lose, and how are you going to reduce your staff? And we got that settled, but one of the other arguments we used in that process was we will be able to do things that we weren't able to do before, but we were supposed to be able to do. We had consistently late filings to the state through the court office because we just didn't have time to do it. It got there, but it was a week late or, a few days late. A lot of things that we weren't able to do and catch up, we were able to catch up on because we now had the time. And frankly, if I were to be fairly honest at this point, and I have been honest through this whole process, don't get me wrong, but I could probably eliminate one person in my court staff in the next year or so because we've become so efficient that we don't need all of the staff that we have. So, those are the kinds of things that you're going to get. We have consistency. Our people really like it. And again, this is what it looked like before. And you always get those after pictures, And believe me, it's true, and it's great. That's what it does do for you. The keys to success that we had, always ask why. Why do you do that? Why do you want to do that? Why does it happen like that? The best way of developing the programs and the systems that you're going to use is to ask why. And you should be doing that anyway. In any process that you have, you ask, why do we do that? Question every single process. Never accept because that's the way we've always done it. And I know that you've never heard that phrase before, right? But that's what always comes up. We're going to change that. Well, that's the way we've always done it. And then they get a little nervous about changing their comfort zone. Never be afraid to move. Anything is fair game. So keep moving after it. Obviously, that's the way you go. You have some names and addresses, phone numbers here. If you want any information, and we'd offer anyone that wants to come and see what we do, we're open for visitation anytime.